We know that at least 3 U.S. service members have been killed as part of this Operation Epic Fury. That's the airstrikes, this continuing campaign.
The United States has released visuals of the first 24 hours of Operation Epic Fury. The visuals have been shared by the U.S. Central Command in a post on X.
Three missiles, 3 American service members dead, and a crater in the middle of a U.S. military installation so deep that satellite imagery had to be recalibrated twice before analysts at the Pentagon believed what they were looking at. This is not ancient history. This is not a chapter from a textbook about wars that happened to other people in other decades. This happened on a base where soldiers were sleeping at 2:47 in the morning, in a place they had been told was fortified, in a place they had been told was safe. Before this story is over, you are going to learn exactly how 3 rockets launched from a sovereign nation crossed hundreds of miles of airspace, struck hardened American military positions, and killed American troops, while a chain of intelligence failures, diplomatic miscalculations, and buried warnings made it all possible. This was not a surprise attack. This was an attack that had been promised, in writing, on camera, and through back-channel communications delivered to American officials weeks before the first warhead left the ground. And someone decided those warnings were not enough to act on. The question you should be asking yourself right now is not why Iran fired those missiles. The question is, who inside the American defense apparatus knew this was coming, and why were those troops still sleeping in the path of it? That answer lives inside a command structure, and it is darker than the explosion itself. The Jordanian desert at 2 in the morning has a particular silence, not peaceful, hollow, a silence that sits on top of the sand like a lid on a coffin. The wind does not howl out there, it whispers. And the temperature drops so fast after sundown that the metal walls of forward operating shelters click and contract, tiny mechanical sounds that soldiers stop hearing after the first week because they have to, because otherwise the emptiness would drive them somewhere they cannot afford to go. Tower 22, that was the designation, a logistics support base positioned near the Syrian and Jordanian borders, a small outpost in the constellation of American military positions scattered across the Middle East. Not a fortress, not a flagship, a waypoint. A place where service members rotated through on support missions, where supply coordination happened in prefabricated buildings that were engineered to be temporary and had somehow become permanent. The base housed roughly 350 U.S. troops. At 2:47 a.m. local time, 3 one-way attack drones, packed with explosive payloads and guided by GPS coordinates that somebody had mapped with terrifying precision, crossed into Jordanian airspace. The first drone struck the northern housing block. The blast compressed the air inside those shelters the way a fist compresses a paper bag. Walls folded, ceilings collapsed inward. Dust, not smoke, not yet, dust hit first, a wall of particulate so thick that the soldiers who survived the initial impact could not see their own hands. Then the fire came. The second drone hit 43 seconds later, a fuel storage point 50 meters south. The detonation was different this time, deeper, longer, a sound that did not crack the air but swallowed it, pulling everything toward the center for one breathless moment before throwing it all outward in a ring of heat and shrapnel. Staff Sergeant Elena Cordova, a fictional name for a very real kind of soldier, had been on her 3rd deployment, 29 years old. She ran logistics coordination for supply convoys moving between Jordan and northeastern Syria. She had told her younger sister on a satellite phone call 2 days earlier that the posting was quiet, boring even. "Nothing happens here," she had said. "That is the whole point of this place." She was not in the housing block when the first drone struck. She was running toward it. That detail, the direction she was moving when the second blast hit, would be recorded in an after-action report that would take 11 weeks to complete. And when it was completed, the people who read it would learn something about the base's early warning systems that turned their grief into something far colder. The defense radar had detected the inbound drones. It had detected them, and then something happened with the response protocol that, as of this moment, has still not been fully explained. Nathaniel Price had spent 14 years inside the Defense Intelligence Agency's Signals Analysis Division. His specialty was pattern recognition in hostile communications, specifically the ability to hear what adversaries were planning by listening not to what they said, but to what they stopped saying. When communications go quiet across known hostile channels in a specific geographic window, that silence is not peace. That silence is preparation. Price knew this better than anyone in his unit. In the 18 days preceding the attack on Tower 22, Iranian-backed militia communications across western Iraq and eastern Syria had gone almost completely dark, not reduced, dark. Price had filed a Priority 2 assessment. The document outlined the communications blackout, cross-referenced it with satellite imagery showing vehicle movements near known militia staging areas, and concluded with a single recommendation printed in bold: forward operating positions within a 200-mile radius of identified staging zones should elevate to Force Protection Condition Delta immediately. That recommendation traveled up the chain of command. It reached a desk at U.S. Central Command. A senior planning official, a fictional figure we will call Deputy Director Raymond Hale, reviewed the assessment, noted it, and folded it into a broader weekly intelligence digest that contained 47 other regional threat assessments. It did not receive a standalone flag. It did not trigger a base-specific elevation in readiness. The assessment became one line in a document that was hundreds of pages long, a document that, by design, made everything inside it equally important, which meant nothing inside it was urgent. The operation had a name. Among the militia cells coordinating the strike, internal communications intercepted after the attack referred to the plan as the Hajar sequence, a name drawn from an Arabic word meaning stone or rock. Something ancient, something immovable, something that had been placed with deliberate patience long before anyone thought to look for it. And the Hajar sequence was not a single attack. It was a campaign, designed in layers, with Tower 22 as its opening statement. What analysts found when they began tracing the planning infrastructure was a web of logistical coordination that stretched from Tehran to Baghdad to Damascus, with financial channels routed through intermediary accounts in 3 countries that the United States considered allies. Imagine a clock with 100 gears. Every gear is in a different country. Every gear turns at a different speed, but they all connect to the same center, and that center was a single operation cell, embedded inside a facility in western Iran that had been designated on American intelligence maps as a civilian agricultural research complex. It was not agricultural research. It was not civilian, and the man overseeing it had a title that appeared nowhere in any military database because his authority did not come from the military. It came from somewhere higher. If you felt that shift, the moment this stopped being about a missile and started being about something designed, then you are exactly where this story needs you. Because what comes next was never supposed to reach the public. Hit like right now so this finds the people who are still being told the simple version. Do not leave. The next 3 minutes will dismantle everything you thought you understood about this attack. At 4:11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Situation Room beneath the White House was fully activated. Not the large conference table that appears in photographs released to the press. The Secondary Operations Theater, a windowless chamber 2 levels below the West Wing, where screens line every wall and the air filtration system hums at a frequency low enough that it settles into the bones of anyone who sits there longer than an hour. 17 screens, each one showing a different feed: satellite thermal, drone surveillance loops, real-time casualty reports scrolling in from CENTCOM's forward medical teams, communications intercepts still being translated by linguists at Fort Meade, working with 3 hours of sleep and coffee that had stopped being effective 2 pots ago. 3 American service members confirmed dead, over 40 wounded. Structural damage to 6 buildings, 1 completely destroyed. The Secretary of Defense, represented here by a fictional official we will call Secretary Arthur Brennan, sat at the center of a table built for 12. Around him, flag officers from every relevant branch. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, CENTCOM's commanding general on secure video link from Tampa, Florida. And in the corner, a civilian intelligence liaison whose face most of the people in that room had never seen before. Within 6 hours, U.S. Air Force assets were repositioned across 3 theaters. B-1B Lancer bombers were moved to forward staging areas. Naval destroyer groups in the eastern Mediterranean adjusted posture. And targeting packages, pre-built folders containing coordinates, satellite confirmation imagery, and projected collateral damage estimates for retaliatory strikes, were placed on Secretary Brennan's desk. 85 targets across 3 countries. Militia weapons depots in western Iraq, command nodes in eastern Syria, and, the one that made the room fall silent, a logistics hub inside Iranian territory that signals intelligence had linked directly to the Hajar sequence planning cell. But here is where the operation fractured. Because in the middle of the targeting discussion, an intelligence officer from the DIA's Middle East desk stood up and placed a single photograph on the table. The photograph showed a building, an unremarkable 3-story concrete building on the outskirts of a city in Deir ez-Zor province, Syria. Inside that building, according to signals intercepts collected in the 72 hours following the Tower 22 strike, were 14 people. Not militants, not fighters, not weapons engineers. 14 aid workers. Hostages. Taken from a humanitarian convoy 3 months earlier. Held in a building that sat 400 meters from one of the 85 targets on Secretary Brennan's desk. The room did not speak for 11 seconds. 11 seconds in a room like that is a year. If we strike that grid coordinate, the intelligence officer said, the blast radius includes that structure. Those 14 people are within the fragmentation envelope. This was the calculation that no press briefing would ever describe. This was the weight that sat on the shoulders of every person in that room. Not whether to respond, but how to respond without becoming the very thing they were responding to. Go back to the beginning of this story. Go back to the moment I told you the defense radar at Tower 22 detected those drones. Now ask yourself, if the radar saw them coming, and the intelligence assessment had already warned this was imminent, why were 350 service members still sleeping in the path of those warheads? Hold that question, because we are about to answer it. Marcus Devlin, a fictional name, had served 22 years in the United States military. 12 of those years were spent in force protection planning. He had built security architectures for bases in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Djibouti. His colleagues described him as methodical, thorough to the point of exhaustion, the kind of officer who checked backup systems for the backup systems and still could not sleep at night because he was running scenarios in his head. What the internal investigation revealed, the one conducted by the Department of Defense Inspector General, the one that was classified at a level that ensured fewer than 40 people in the entire federal government would ever read it, quietly destroyed every assumption Devlin had built his career on. The radar at Tower 22 had detected the inbound drones at a range of approximately 11 miles. 11 miles. At the speed those drones were traveling, that gave the base between 90 seconds and 2 minutes of warning time, enough to activate the CRAM counter-rocket defense system, enough to trigger base-wide alarms, enough to move personnel into hardened shelters. None of that happened within the necessary window. The CRAM system was operational. It had been tested 6 days prior. It functioned, but the human authorization chain, the sequence of confirmations required before the system could engage an inbound threat, contained a bureaucratic redundancy that had been added 18 months earlier by a policy revision authored at the Pentagon. That revision required a secondary confirmation from a regional operations center before base-level commanders could activate kinetic countermeasures against unidentified aerial objects. The Regional Operations Center was 70 miles away. The communications lag, encrypted, routed through satellite relay, took between 40 and 60 seconds on a good night. On the night of the attack, atmospheric conditions degraded the satellite link. The confirmation request was sent. It was received 14 seconds after the first drone struck the housing block. 14 seconds too late. Not because of incompetence, not because someone was asleep at their post, not because the technology failed, because a policy, written in an office building in Arlington, Virginia, by a committee that had never stood on the sand at Tower 22, had never heard the silence of the Jordanian desert at 2 in the morning, had never felt the walls of a temporary shelter click and contract in the cold. That policy had inserted a delay into the one system designed to keep those soldiers alive. The delay was 40 seconds. The margin of survival was 30. And somewhere in a filing cabinet in the Pentagon, the name of the official who had signed that policy revision into effect sat inside a document that nobody had requested, nobody had questioned, and nobody had connected to the 3 flag-draped coffins that arrived at Dover Air Force Base 6 days later. Deputy Director Raymond Hale, the same man who had received Nathaniel Price's intelligence assessment, the same man who had folded it into a 500-page digest, the same man who had authored the policy revision that added the secondary confirmation requirement to the CRAM engagement chain. He did not make one mistake. He made a sequence of decisions, each one individually defensible, each one bureaucratically sound, that together formed a corridor through which 3 drones flew without resistance into the bodies of sleeping Americans. This was not sabotage. This was something worse. This was a system so layered in procedure, so insulated by process, so protected by the very complexity designed to prevent errors, that it had become incapable of doing the single thing it existed to do: protect the people inside it. If you are still watching, this is no longer a story about missiles. This is a story about what happens when the machinery meant to shield people becomes the machinery that buries them. Drop the word corridor in the comments. Subscribe, because the next story goes deeper than the policy. Share this tonight with someone who has family in uniform. They deserve to hear what the briefing will never say. Now go back, listen to every moment from the beginning, every warning that was filed, every assessment that was noted, every system that was tested and declared operational. Listen to all of it again, because now you know that every safeguard, every protocol, every layer of protection those soldiers believed was standing between them and the night had a 40-second hole in it, and nobody had told them. The attack on Tower 22 was not an isolated event. In the weeks and months that followed, the full scope of the Hajar sequence began to surface in intelligence reports that circulated through CENTCOM, the DIA, the CIA's Near East Division, and the National Security Council. Tower 22 was the opening move. Intercepted communications recovered from militia networks in Iraq's Anbar province revealed that at least 7 additional American military positions across the Middle East had been mapped, surveilled, and assigned targeting packages by Iranian-backed cells operating in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. Al-Assad Air Base, Al-Tanth Garrison, Erbil, the Green Village Complex in northeastern Syria. Each one had been studied. Each one had been assigned a strike window. Each one had a file. The logistical network supporting these operations stretched across borders with the fluidity of a commercial supply chain. Drone components manufactured in Iran were shipped in disassembled form through Iraqi border crossings controlled by militia-aligned customs officials. Guidance systems were programmed at a facility near Abu Kamal, Syria, a city that had changed hands so many times during the Civil War that its administrative infrastructure had essentially become a ghost. Warheads were assembled in mobile workshops that moved every 72 hours, never appearing on satellite imagery long enough to be targeted. Analysts calculated that this network was capable of launching sustained multi-site attacks across the entire U.S. Central Command area of operations, not for days, but for weeks. The supply pipeline was not improvised, it was industrialized. Every component, every route, every assembly point had redundancy built into it. Destroy one node, and the network rerouted through two others within 48 hours. And on the deepest encrypted partition of a server seized during a joint U.S.-Jordanian raid on a militia safehouse outside Rutba, Iraq, analysts found one final file. It was not an attack plan. It was not a targeting list. It was a strategic doctrine, a 63-page document written in Farsi outlining a long-term campaign to make American military presence in the Middle East so costly, so politically unbearable, so relentlessly dangerous that withdrawal would become not a policy choice, but a political inevitability. Not through a single spectacular attack, through attrition, through the slow accumulation of coffins, through the steady erosion of public will measured not in battles, but in funerals. The document's final line, translated by 3 independent linguists to confirm accuracy, read, "The stone does not need to move fast, it only needs to never stop." The Hajar sequence had not been stopped at Tower 22. It had introduced itself. Somewhere in a town in Georgia, a small place, the kind with one high school and a water tower you can see from every street, there is a woman who received a phone call at 4 in the morning. She had been sleeping on the couch, not because the bed was uncomfortable, but because she had gotten into the habit of sleeping near the front door during deployments, as if being closer to the entrance meant she would hear good news faster. The phone rang. She knew before she answered. Mothers know. They know the way the air changes in a room before the words arrive. They know what a call at 4 in the morning means when their child is on the other side of the world, in a place they cannot pronounce and were never shown on a map. Her son was 23. He had joined because he wanted to pay for college without putting the burden on her. That was the reason. Not patriotism first, not ideology. He wanted his mother to stop working double shifts at the hospital so he could attend a state school. He was asleep when the drone hit. He did not hear it. She will hear it for the rest of her life. Federal investigators would later determine that the policy redundancy in the CRAM engagement chain, the 40-second delay, had been flagged as a potential vulnerability in an internal review 9 months before the attack. The review recommended removing the secondary confirmation requirement for forward operating bases classified as Tier 3 or below. Tower 22 was Tier 3. The recommendation was noted. It was not implemented. The review sat in the same bureaucratic pipeline as every other document that is noted but not acted upon. Not because the people who read it did not care, but because the system they operated within had made inaction indistinguishable from process. 3 families received flags. 47 families received hospital visits. And the policy that created the 40-second gap, as of the last publicly available information, remained under review. Not revoked, not suspended, under review. Power does not always arrive as a missile. Sometimes it arrives as a revision to a protocol nobody outside a single department will ever read. A line added to a flowchart, a requirement inserted between the moment of detection and the moment of defense. And by the time the cost of that insertion is measured, it is measured in names on a wall, not in lines on a document. Federal officials stated that a comprehensive review of force protection engagement protocols across all CENTCOM area installations was underway. That retaliatory strikes had degraded, but not eliminated, the militia networks responsible for the Tower 22 attack. That the investigation into intelligence handling failures was ongoing. And for the first time in a long time, the families who lost someone that night were asking questions that the system was not designed to answer. Not whether the enemy was dangerous, they already knew that, but whether the system built to protect their children had been more concerned with protecting itself. This story is fictional, The warning threaded through it is not. The names are invented. The pattern, where bureaucratic complexity becomes indistinguishable from abandonment, is documented across decades of military history. If this reached you, let it reach further. Like this, leave a comment, share it with someone who wears the uniform or loves someone who does. Subscribe, because the next story will not be easier to hear. And remember the families who are still waiting for answers that live inside filing cabinets no one has opened. That is why this story exists. Every name, every official, every event described in this story is entirely fictional, created for dramatic storytelling purposes only. The agencies and military branches referenced are real. The broader concerns about force protection policy, intelligence handling, and bureaucratic delay are documented matters of public discussion. The specific narrative, characters, and events depicted here are not real.